we are hoping that this can be as experiential as possible for you all. So there'll be a mix of theory, former theory, as well as some practices which we hope you can take forward into your own life, your organisation life, and with families. So welcome. And before we get into sort of introducing the topic, I wanted to acknowledge and welcome this wonderful human in my life and who's in the screen now, Swan. I'm so grateful that we are here doing this together. We've had many conversations about joining up and leading things together, and now it's sort of happened. So Maylai is a dear friend of mine, but an incredible woman who has a undergraduate degree in international studies and environmental studies and a master's in social work. Maylai is the founder of Yoga for Humankind, which is an organisation which really meets at the intersection of yoga, social justice and embodied social change. She's the previous CEO and founder of Birth for Humankind, which is a non-for-profit organisation providing free birth support to women experiencing socioeconomic disadvantage. Like me, Maylai is a person who is largely based on the road. She spent a lot of time in Aboriginal communities in Australia and now travels internationally, teaching yoga, meditation, trauma-informed and somatic-based practices. The resume, like the list is just so long, Maylai. I could just keep on, because I'm your major fangirl, I could just keep on talking about you. But maybe I'll stop there so we can actually get into the content. So welcome.
Thank you, Anna.
Now, welcome to all of you, 236 attendees from all around Australia, just blown away that we can gather in such unprecedented and strange times. And I just really wanted to acknowledge that, and also acknowledge the places in which you're calling in from. I know a lot of people are juggling multiple hats at the moment. Maybe you're in your living room now surrounded by children or different family members. Maybe you're still navigating the workspace in your organisations or sitting with your teams. Whatever it is that you're holding, I think what Maylai and I are really passionate about is creating spaces where we, I guess, allow everything to come forward and hold all of that. I know for me at the moment, I'm truly blown away with the amount my body can hold in terms of the fear and the grief, as well as moments of joy, and it's sort of all coming together as one. And that's a huge element of what it is to be trauma informed, is to notice and welcome everything that comes forward. So now I've introduced Maylai and acknowledged you all. I guess for those of you who don't know me, my name is Anna McCracken. I'm a social strategist, social worker, and I have a master's in human rights law. I've been working alongside ECIA for about 7 years now, following the NDIS rollout across the country. And I guess what my passion is bringing trauma education and the knowledge of who we are as humans, which is our brain. We often just think of the brain, but this whole being that we are, and how we can bring that knowledge and psychoeducation into our systems and our workplaces and our education. Because I think once we have a stronger understanding about how we are as humans and how we respond to situations, we can live more compassionate and more attuned lives. So I'm already sick of my own voice, and it's been 5 minutes, so this is going to be interesting. Might handball to you, Maylai. The structure that we're going to go forward is we'll be sort of going back and forth. Maylai is going to lead an acknowledgement and an initial practice. And then we're going to sort of get into what trauma-informed practice means, some trauma theory, and I guess provide some resources and practical skills that you can take home and into your work and into families' homes and over Zoom for the next coming months. One of the things that I'm so happy to see is the engagement in the chat box. And I really welcome that to happen. We'll try and keep our eye on that. If you've got questions that you would like asked, please just pop them in there any time, and we'll try and weave some of that in. We probably won't have a dedicated Q&A time, so we will just do what we can to thread it through. And one of the other things that we're wanting to do is to, at the end of this 90 minutes together, have a living, breathing collective document that we've all done together around sharing resources and strategies that we might be using already in our work. And if any of those thoughts come up as we speak, please pop them in the chat box. So grateful to have my dear friend Hannah on the back end collating some of that. So by the end of today, we should have a document that we can share to everyone with different resources and strategies. We'll put a reminder to that at the end as well when it becomes a bit more relevant. Anyway, so you've been sitting there so patiently, Mayline. My voice is already irritating me. So should we start by some welcoming into the space?
Yeah, let's do that. Thank you, Anna, so much for inviting me to be part of this webinar today. It's really my pleasure to be here with you all and to be sharing some of the practices that I've found so helpful in my own life and with so many of the people that I've worked with all over the world. Because we're navigating moving from face-to-face work and in-person, in-body work to working on screens, I thought a nice way to start might actually be to acknowledge still where you are in place and space, and take a little bit of time to do an embodied setup, which might sound kind of strange, given that we're working on a screen. I know you can see me and Anna. It feels quite odd for me that I can't see any of you, but you know, this is what we're working with, and there's still so much that we can do. So as a way of starting, and you're welcome to have your eyes open or closed just for a moment, as a way of just pausing and arriving where you are. And beginning with an acknowledgement of country. And a way of doing that is to invite you to ask yourself the question, whose land am I on? Whose land am I on? And whether you know the names of the people who are the custodians of the land that you might be on in this moment, or not, offering them acknowledgement, offering them respect. And also offering that acknowledgement to the land itself that holds us and nourishes us. And if your eyes are closed at any time, you're welcome to open your eyes and take a look around the physical space that you're in this moment. So even though you've got a screen in front of you and this is how we're engaging, each one of us is actually still in a physical environment and not just in a virtual environment. So you're welcome to take that in and let that be part of your experience of this webinar as well. And it can be really nice sometimes to take a moment break from looking at the screen to even just looking up around you and just seeing where you are. So you're welcome to do that at any time. Often when we set up for on-screen work, there's a real tendency to be very close to the screen. And this is often our view. And I'm saying this for those who are working directly with families or doing online meetings with staff at this time and colleagues, that a nice way to set up could be to sit back a little bit from a screen. So I actually took a bit of time to set up where I am and how I'm positioned so that you can see a bit more of my body, because we communicate so much through our bodies and through gestures. You might even be able to see the movement of breath, these little signals that communicate to us so much of what's happening internally. So even though we're not face to face, I'm talking to all of you who are here as participants and watching along, if you want, you could experiment with that, depending if you're watching on your phone, laptop, desktop, and seeing what's available to you. Just experiment with your setup there. And then also to take a moment to consider how you're sitting and how your body feels in the place that it's in. And part of this is also the practice of slowing down and arriving, the setup for the way that we begin often really shapes what comes next. So you're welcome to shift or change the position of your body. Might even find that a little bit of movement helps you to settle in. I have 2 cushions behind me. So that is something that I feel really supportive. So I can sit a little bit upright, but still feel supported. And so really here, if you could be 5 to 10% more comfortable, tuning into your own body, what are some movements or things that you might shift or change to support you to be 5 to 10% more comfortable here? And inviting yourself the opportunity to arrive in this place, in this space, and in this present moment with your whole being. So not just your mind, but your whole body. And I know for probably all of us doing this work with your heart also. So I'm going to hand back to Anna for a little brief introduction around trauma-informed approaches.
Thank you, Maylai. I have my heat pack here with me today and my hot tea as a way of staying regulated, because it's quite overwhelming. We're at 244 attendees, so I'm going to try and stop looking at the list of people and just be here with you. So yes, trauma-informed practice. It's a broad term. Maybe we can engage in a conversation in this and then I'll pop up a slide, Maylai. But for me, trauma-informed practice, I like to think it as human-informed practice. I think in the work I've done through my social work degree, I didn't really get too much information about what is actually happening in the body when we go through our day-to-day, when we are moving through these states that are unconscious but that shape our behaviours. And I think in the work, my relationship with families and clients really changed, particularly in the counselling mode, when I was able to access this information, which didn't require a major upskilling, didn't require me to get a master's in anything, but was this information around how to be in the world a little bit more sensitive, a little bit more gentle, and a little bit more attuned. And I guess when we have a deeper understanding about how trauma and overwhelming stress can play out in a person's life and what's happening in the body, I think we can engage differently in relationships. What does it mean to you, Maylai?
I would absolutely agree that it is first and foremost about being deeply human and everything that comes with that. I was even thinking with the, as you're kind of reading out what I've done in my life, I'm like, yeah, okay, but for me, the most important thing is that deep sense of my own humanity and my own heart, and recognizing how it's so much about how we're connected and in relationship with each other, and really seeing the bigger picture of all of those interconnecting pieces of our lives.
Yeah, absolutely.
That passion.
Yeah. And the reason why I guess Maylai and I wanted to offer this session is, and Lisa Dion, who is, she founded Synergetic Play Therapy, she speaks a lot about this, but, we move through our lives and we borrow each other's nervous system because we're in relationship with each other constantly. And that could be people in our home, people at work, and the families we work with. And that might make sense a little bit when I go through more of the trauma theory around the nervous system. But at the moment, we're in this strange time where there's a global threat which we're all interpreting and perceiving differently, which is, I guess, influencing the response that we're having. And that particular response that I'm having impacts other people as well. And noticing what's happening in the exchange by going within and inquiring within has helped me try and sort of, as you said yesterday, Mayla, just navigate these seas and trying to stay calm when in this time. So to be a bit fancy, I might just share a slide just to mix things up a bit so I can stop staring at my head. So let me do that. Can you see that, Maylai?
Yep.
Perfect. So as I said before, trauma-informed practice, being trauma-informed does not require this extensive study or radical steps to skill building, which was a relief for me because I'm always trying to pile different courses on top of myself. But trauma-informed practice is about how we relate to one another, the way in which we support one another and understand one another in order to minimise the likelihood of interactions between each one of us being stressful. So it's just this noticing and understanding and inquiring about what might be happening. Anything else on trauma-informed practice in terms of it as a whole before we move on, Maylai?
I feel like that's a good place to land that little piece for now. And I mean, I guess I really encourage you as well, for those who are watching, to reflect on what it might mean to you as well. And, you know, whether you have done study or whether you've seen things in practice or been mulling over things on your own, just to do some more reflection and to be having conversations with other people as well, because that's where so much of the living wisdom of, you know, trauma-informed and human-informed practice comes out.
Yeah, I think Amber Gray, our dear friend and teacher, said once that she's a trauma therapist, and she said once, I don't work with trauma, I work with humans in their humanness. And that's really sat with me because one of the things in my work that I'm passionate about is moving away from this pathologizing and diagnosing and placing us in boxes, and understanding that it's not just about how to respond to people who may have experienced or are experiencing trauma, it's how we can respond to each other always and have a deeper understanding about what might be happening. Yeah. So shall we? Shall we move on? So I think the next part, Mayla, we're going to move into a practice.
Yeah. I'm happy to share a short practice. And this is when we're looking at trauma-informed approach, so much of that is about how we include the body and the nervous system and our whole selves in the work and in each moment as much as possible. That's really unfamiliar for so many of us. We haven't been taught ever how to do that. We've never been told that that's important. Many of us don't even know what that is or what it means. So some of the practices that we'll be sharing today are really shared with that intention of finding a way of welcoming your whole self to be present. And I will say, for many of you watching too, that is probably intuitive and instinctive and you're doing it all the time, but you might not have words to name it or describe it. So we'll put the pieces together. So this is a short practice that is a welcoming practice, arriving practice. And it's offered as a way of slowing down and offered as a way of connecting in and creating a little bit more internal space. so that you can be truly present in the moment to yourself and to whoever you might be with, rather than being caught up in a mind stream or some internal agitation, for example. So I'm just creating a little bit of space. This will just be for a few minutes. So you're welcome, as you settle in and prepare, to have your eyes closed or open as you prefer. And to maybe check in again with your body and make any adjustments, large or small, that would feel supportive for you to have a sense of arriving and welcoming your body and your whole self here in this moment. And beginning to bring some attention to what's happening in your internal world. And with a lot of uncertainty that's happening around us and change, there may be sensations of discomfort, there may be sensations of comfort. And what I invite you to do is, rather than react to what you find or judge them, to invite a sense of curiosity and a sense of openness. But even for a moment, you might be willing to really meet and welcome what's happening in your internal world. Because often what's happening there are signals that your body's sharing with you, indicating what's happening or some action that might be useful to take. Pausing and slowing down enough, being curious and kind. That whatever you might be meeting and welcoming internally, offering a sense of kindness. Maybe asking yourself the question, what's moving in me now? What am I feeling in this moment? With the invitation that whatever shows up is welcome. What's moving in me now? What am I feeling? And how can I welcome whatever is showing up in my internal world? And then beginning to transition back towards our shared space. If your eyes are closed, you're welcome to slowly open them. You might take a look around the space that you're in. If you're in a room or outside, it's always my wish is to be outside. And maybe bringing a little gentle movement back into your body. A little shoulder roll might be helpful, or a little wriggle. And I am going to do a figurative handball back to Anne. I'm so dorky and welcoming all of the parts of self.
Let the dork come out. I love that practice then. I just realised I haven't actually stopped today to have an oxygen moment, which is probably why I was so stressed leading into this webinar. So thank you. I could also hear my neighbour at the front door asking if we're feeding her cat. So that was also happening at the same time. It's nice to have that separation. And thank you for the comments around, someone just said that was really grounding. So that's beautiful feedback. So let's get into potentially some theory, which will be on the slides. And I guess before I start this, and I know that you're passionate about this as well, Maylai, but a large dominant culture of trauma research, and I guess the main people that have led a lot of the trauma research are largely white males, and that's sort of been the dominant culture. And I wanted to acknowledge that because I am, in one hand, very grateful for the research that's come out and the dominant voices in the field, but also I wanted to acknowledge the amazing work that's also happening outside of that, and really encourage you in your exploration past this webinar to look at the diverse voices that exist in trauma research and the trauma field, and also acknowledge that trauma is a political experience as much as it is a physical and physiological experience, and it's important to, I guess, keep that in mind. And I just wanted to put it out there before I get into the slides, because it's something that I think we really need to be having conversations about. Did you want to make any comment, Mayla, before getting?
I love that acknowledgement. I think it's so important, and to acknowledge that those who have become well known in the trauma field, that's only because of the many, many thousands and thousands of people who have, shown up in their vulnerability and their desire for a greater well-being, and have shared that. So really, we only have that because of the so many people who have been present with their experience and shared that for all of our benefit.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I'm just going to share again, if this works. Can you see that, Mayla?
Mm-hmm.
This is actually a quote I took from your book that you put together, and I just love it so much. And it's on people's screen to read, and I can read it out in a minute, but I just wanted to say that putting trauma-informed practice into a 90-minute webinar is pretty much impossible. I am an overachiever, but this was a little bit ambitious between us. So the theory that I'm getting in today is really, really the basics of, I'm just going to give an overview of the brain and explain it in a way that I use in talking to children and adolescents, and how I've introduced it into schools across the country. The reason why I'm giving it to you like that is so that it's information, but also something that you might be able to then go and use in a story with families. And likewise, the same with the nervous system. So this might be really intro information for you all, but we felt like we needed to offer it before we could, the whole sort of is an all-encompassing thing, but it's very much being modified. So just an overview of, I'll read this quote, that a traumatic event is anything that overwhelms our capacity to cope and respond. It leaves us feeling helpless, hopeless, and out of control. When we think about trauma, we usually think about the big things like a car accident, abuse, or war, but trauma lives on the spectrum. We're shaped by the big ones and the little ones. When we don't have tools and resources to deal with traumatic events, they impact our physiology, they impact our bodies. When we're not able to get ourselves to safety or say what we need to say, traumatic energy gets stuck in the body. So trauma can be defined as the experience and the effects of overwhelming stress. So often we think about trauma as it's not just the event, it's actually what happens post the event for the person that is considered a trauma. Trauma overwhelms a person's ability to cope when faced with threat, or when they believe that threat to safety is possible. So it might not be that they're actually being immersed in it, but it might be the perception of being unsafe. Now, I wanted to link that to stress because, at the moment we are all experiencing in some way different types of stress. And we've got this collective global stress happening, as well as our own individual experiences that have come out of that, on top of what we were already holding. So stress is interesting. I guess people that have experienced trauma may respond differently to stresses that people have not experienced trauma. So we all sort of, I think, would be aware of what stress is and what chronic stress can result in. But I just wanted to emphasise that when I get through the slides a little bit more, it's important to note that people that have had adverse experiences, including in their childhood or in their later years, do respond differently in times of stress. However, in saying that, experiencing stress and experiencing trauma is a body response, and so what I'm about to talk about relates to both stress, chronic stress and overwhelming stress, and trauma. Feel free to jump in, Maylai. As I said before, I'm already sick of my voice.
Doing great.
I just want to pause, and I'm going to take a deep inhale and an exhale. I need to build these in, or else I start waffling on. So I'm going to take an inhale, and you're welcome to join me. So I'm going to take an inhale and an exhale. So the brain. Now I want to get into sort of what's happening in the body, and oops, I've got a typo on my slide, but this is a way, I was told this a number of years ago, and it's adapted by Education Department, and I think I've just anified it a little bit, but I know that they have some resources there that might be useful. I want to explain it like this so that you might be able to explain it to children and families. So rather than getting into all the brain structures, really I like to think of it as the tale of Rex and Albert Einstein. So Rex is that dinosaur, that reptilian brain that develops first. And when you're explaining this, I like to use touch as well, just to bring sense of touch to the body. So Rex is in this downstairs part here. As we know, is the brainstem's the first part of the brain to develop, and then it builds from there. So Rex is incredibly important because this reptilian part of the brain actually keeps us breathing, keeps our heart rate going, and sort of does all these unconscious functions that we need in order to survive. So it is the survival part of our brain. So in this tale, Rex, he's there living downstairs of the house, and he decided he was quite lonely, just living alone, and wanted to be a little bit more human. So he built a upstairs part of his brain so that he could experience different things around creativity, learning, language, and all those things. So he built a stairway, and Albert Einstein moved in and lived upstairs. And so this is this front part of the brain here. So we've got Rex living downstairs here, keeping the house safe, keeping everything going. And we've got Albert Einstein, who moved into this front part of the brain. And generally they live quite well in most circumstances, in that they're all they're just living sort of a coexistence together. However, Rex can have a little bit of a tantrum. And what happens for Rex is all part of the survival mechanism, is that when he feels like there's a threat, he can go into these states that you would be familiar with, being fight, flight, or freeze. And when that happens, the stairway between Rex and Albert is closed, and Rex is running the show. Rex has taken over the house, which means in those moments, Rex finds it very hard to engage with the upstairs brain. In fact, we can know this is sort of the upstairs goes offline, and that we're in this state where we are in a complete survival mode. So these upstairs processes of language, of reasoning, of creating a rational story around the situation have gone offline, and Rex has sort of taken over. So this is the way I explain it to children, and I normally act it out, and I even have, which I don't have today, 2 little puppets that I sometimes use as well. The reason why I talk to children and families about this is because often we are trying to understand behaviours and trying to hold relationships with people when they are actually potentially not in their upstairs brain. They're not in that that mode to be able to engage. Something might have happened either in that moment, or their internal states have changed through exposure to trauma, where they are not able to have that engagement. And so we're thinking, why can't we just have this conversation? Why don't you get it right now? Why won't you listen to me? Or with parents saying to children, perhaps really frustrated at, why can't you just listen? Why are you doing that? We've talked about this before. Why are you doing that? And really, when the child is overwhelmed or in that Rex brain, there's none of that reasoning going on. So this can be a response to stress. And I'll talk more about some other ways that we can talk about the brain. Did you want to add anything there, Maylai?
Nothing to add.
The only other thing is if you want to get really creative, you can add Mr. Monkey, which we've done a couple of times, which is talking more about the limbic system of the brain and how that plays into the house. I haven't done it for the purposes of this, but you can get creative with all different characters that you want to add in. In essence, what you just want to get across is that there are these 2 major parts of the brain that are really crucial when talking about stress, threat, and our behavioural responses. So I'm just going to have a sip of tea. I hope everyone's feeling okay. It's so bizarre that I can't see faces and I don't know what's happening out there, but I hope everyone's all right. Okay, so we had the house, but we're not just brains, we are whole bodies. And when that is happening, that is setting off a whole system of responses that are happening inside of us. So these are things that you might be familiar with, I'm sure, but we just wanted to go over it. So the sympathetic nervous system, or known as the accelerator, is that fight or flight response. Now, and the parasympathetic nervous system is the brakes or the freeze. Now, we absolutely need these 2 systems, or else we would cease to exist. So in a day-to-day, the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system are moving along quite nicely generally. And so before this webinar, for example, I could feel a little bit more of my sympathetic nervous system kick into gear as I felt like a little bit of stress pop up. But I was able to grab a cup of coffee and a heat pack and regulate myself back down. So I'm sort of staying in a safe zone. Now, so there's the fight and flight response, which is the sympathetic nervous system. And then there's that freeze response, which is the parasympathetic nervous system. The other thing that I like to call sort of the radio, so if we're talking about sort of this as a car, is the social engagement system. Now, this is sort of an emerging field for those of you who are content nerds and want to get into the detail. And an interesting field to immerse in is the polyvagal theory. And I won't get too much into it, but rather that what was found is that we actually have another system which we use first before the other ones kick in, and that's the social engagement system. Okay, so how this works in reality is that it's like a ladder. So if you can imagine a ladder, and there's a hierarchy of responses. And so let's talk about Rex and Albert and link them to the ladder. So something happens in your day-to-day and you're going along, and Rex and something threatens the house. So the first thing you might actually start to do is you might call out for help, or you might look around and see sort of who is who's responding, and if you can make eye contact with someone. And what you're doing in that moment is really trying to orient yourself to understand, is safety there? So there's that amazing example of when you're on a plane and there's turbulence, and people look straight away at the air hostess or air host, and you you're looking for eye contact and you're looking at their facial features to see, am I okay? If they smile and they're talking to each other, you're like, phew, okay, everything's all right. And that's really where that response stops. If you've looked at them and that's not being the case, what then happens is we go to our next sort of evolutionary part on the ladder, which is the flight and fight response. And that's the sympathetic nervous system. And even though it's sort of got those broad terms, it doesn't mean that we're going around fighting people. But what it does mean is that we've sort of moved from looking at the face and really feeling it up here, and we've moved to more of our limbs are activated, and we might start to respond in a different way, sort of using sort of this part of the body. If we're in this part of the body and we're in fight or flight response, and that doesn't work for us in the threat, we then dropped down into freeze, and that's the parasympathetic nervous system kicking on. And freeze, you can see sometimes, and I invite you to think about this potentially in your work where you might have seen some of these examples play out. And freeze can be not just like an animal freezing, for example. It can be a more flatter effect, a sort of really overwhelm, the body sort of starting to shut down. And the final response, which is sort of our oldest response, is that that real shutdown, which really happens in the bottom part, in the gut area of our body. Does that make sense, Mela? Or am I?
Yes, it does make sense. I'm just watching, I'm just seeing pop up in the chat. Does some people skip the social engagement step if they have experienced multiple times of not being reassured in the past?
Oh my gosh, love questions. Did you want to answer this, Mela?
I can, yeah, I'm happy to.
Yeah.
So what happens often is when we have our first sort of major experiences of overwhelming stress, or often that overwhelming stress, our bodies instinctively go to one of these responses, and it's absolutely not in our control which one it goes to, in that hierarchy too. So what can happen often is that if there has been a lot of activation, or where someone's body has gone into shutdown as a key protective response, that the next time there's a threat that may be a similar threat or a similar level of nervous system activation, there's already that patterned response that the body already knows, okay, that worked for me last time, so let's do that again. So in that sense, yes, it can absolutely skip safe and social. It can sometimes even skip flight and fright and go straight to shutdown, even if the level of stress may not be as significant.
And also on that is that safe and social assumes as well, and this is interesting for early childhood experiences, is that not all children have had attuned, strong, attached and safe homes. And so we really learn about safety and attunement through our primary caregivers as well. So that all plays into how we perceive safety and how that sort of affects us over a lifetime and how we engage socially. Another thing on that point that just came to mind is I was just thinking about, I was working for some time with teenagers who were either being or at risk of being radicalised. And it was interesting because a lot of them, and I guess it's the same for gangs almost, but it's just this group of boys sort of lived in a constant state of their body sort of wired to fight. And it was as if it's like the energy and the constant threat sort of keeps them in these states. So then it's not a conscious thing that they want to be stuck in those states, but that over time has sort of been the main way for them to survive. Every single one of these states, as Mela said, is unconscious, and they are there for our survival. So they're absolutely necessary. However, they can be online and sort of be at play for various ranges of times, depending on what trauma we've experienced or what we're experiencing in the moment. So I think on that, I might just, can I draw something? Oh my gosh, I can draw. Let's see if this draws. Oh yeah, okay. Can you see that? May I? My draw, not I might make it a bit bigger. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay. I might do it on this white bit here, but I just wanted to, oh, what's that? Thanks everyone's patience at home. I promise that I'm trying to draw something useful. Okay, there's one line. So there's an interesting resource, and I guess a lot of research behind this. And again, people at home probably really aware of this, but it might be useful just to bring it into, as we're talking about the polyvagal ladder here, is that imagine these two lines that I've drawn here are sort of a window, and they're known as sort of, this area is known as the optimum zone of arousal, or the window of tolerance. So I use this with teenagers and families to sort of track where they're at. So in this zone here, this middle bit here, this is sort of where we feel most safe and where we feel comfortable. So through the day, we might have these experiences that sort of push us up, and we're like, oh, I'm on the edge of that comfort level, I don't know, and we might shoot back down, but we sort of move along the day in this window. Now up here, above the window of tolerance, we have what we were talking about before, is that sympathetic nervous system that accelerate. And so that's the fight or flight area up here. And down here, we have that freeze, that parasympathetic nervous system. So what can happen is we can be sort of going through our window, as I said before, and someone might cut us off in traffic, and we might get this response. And so we might shoot there, or we might overshoot the window. And so we're operating then, we've gone way outside of our window, we're way outside of our sort of tolerance safety area. And we're now lurking in this area of hyper arousal. So we're feeling really accelerated. The same can happen. We can shoot down here and feel a lot of overwhelm and start to shut down. So what this is talking about here is that we have multiple ways, and we're going to go to this in a minute, around resourcing, around how we stay in this sort of zone of optimal arousal, or this window of tolerance. But for people who've experienced trauma or significant stress, their window of tolerance, instead of being what I've just drawn, it might be really small. And what that means is that they're actually shooting in and out of the window more often than you might be. And we all have very different windows of tolerance, and mapping it with people can be really empowering, because you can start to talk about the behaviors that might happen when you've gone above or below, and you start to remove, in a way, judging the behaviors and having more compassion around why that might be, and that person can feel a little bit more in control. So this is a tool that can be used for that. Did you want to add anything there, Maylai?
No, good summary.
So that's the nervous system. Oh, how do I stop that? Just on that, I'm just looking at my notes quickly. And I was saying this to Maylai last night, that one of the things I've been thinking about when looking at the news is, and maybe this will make more sense after what I've just spoken about, but it's like telling someone not to hoard toilet paper in these times is similar to telling someone how they should respond when sharks are circulating them in the water. The body is responding to a threat in a way that it is unconscious. It's an unconscious process. And so the lack of scarcity, or I'm not going to have enough, or this I need to do something, which is this fight response and flight response coming in of like, if I do this and this and this, I'm going to be safe. These are all behaviours that come from this response to the threat. And so I guess having more compassion, it helps me have more compassion to say, that's interesting, that might be what's happening for that person over there. Oh, I've got the annotation on every, I've drawn on all the slides. This is a whole new world. Okay, just some other strategies for you if you're there thinking this might be an interesting way to have a conversation with families. I've put the thermometer up, this sort of boiling thing up here. I use that a lot with children. And so I can try and work out, all right, really we're sort of all simmering. We might be just simmering on a pot. What is it that happens in your day-to-day that turns that heat up that you're bubbling over? So that's sort of bringing in the psychoeducation that's what happens when something happens to you from outside of you. And then the question is, and what resources or what do you need or what do you do to bring yourself down? And so you can start to map levels of temperature and sort of where things are at with children. And I have the young people I work with, which is mainly teenagers, they'll now tell me like, Anna, I am in my Rex brain. I was just in my Rex brain and I'm at an 8. I've been able to get myself down so we can have this conversation, but I need to do this, this and this. And so we can start to have conversations about where they're at. Another one that can be done is the glitter jar. It sort of just works like a snow cone, if you can imagine. And you can use it with children to show what happens so you've got the glitter sort of resting, and to show what happens in the body when you feel a bit shaken up. And that with all the glitter moving around, this is all of these hormones and responses going on in the body that you can't control, and that it does tend to settle at times, but how does it settle, and sort of inviting those questions. So there's many different ways of engaging, and the other one that's quite popular is the flip your lid description by Dan Siegel, which is really just using your hands. So if you can imagine before, the downstairs brain here being Rex, so he lives here, and then the upstairs Albert Einstein. And what happens is that that's your brain, and when you're feeling overwhelmed or a stressor comes, you're experiencing something quite significant, you can flip your lid, as he said, which is taking the upstairs part of the brain offline. And this is what we're sort of working with here, which is the Rex part, the downstairs part. Anything to add, Maylai?
No.
Okay, I'm nearly done. So I guess what happens when, and this is again a conversation for families, and you can, as I said, you can use it in parenting, you can use it with children, you can use it with self and your teams. If you haven't picked up already, everything we're talking about is actually applicable to all humans. What happens when your lid is on? What happens when your house is working okay with Rex just cooling his jets and Albert Einstein or Picasso painting the top? Is that we can take a pause and we can make a choice about the decisions. So when we understand, all right, this is what's happening, and noticing what's happening inside, we're given this beautiful moment in time to have a pause and then to make a choice about what we do next. When the brakes and the accelerator sort of working together in their normal rhythm, which is sort of keeping us alive, keeping our heart going, our breath going, helping us digest, helping us rest. These are all the functions of these systems that we need. When they're working together, we can move towards this regulation of the body. When our lid is on, we can attune to ourself, which is to know what we need and know what's happening inside, and we can then attune to other people. And this is going back again to that we're borrowing each other's nervous system. When we feel attuned, and we can attune and we can help regulate other people, we're actually supporting each other to feel okay. we can hold relationships. So I'm sure it will come to mind families and people that you work with that are often in their downstairs part of their brain. They've flipped their lid, or their window of tolerance is so small, and relationships can be really hard. And hopefully now it gives you some insight into why, in that we're really asking the impossible, because we're asking parts of the brain to engage that are actually not there. They're not online. This isn't a conscious choice. We can respond beyond the behaviour, and I think that's really important to know for children as well. And so we can see things differently and rationally, and we can have these more fun and playful experiences. So this is my last slide before we actually put some of this into action. I guess, so how do we regulate? And Maylai is going to go into this a little bit further, but even these brief moments of awareness to anchor help us understand where we're at. Even just being able to drop in throughout moments of the day and access that present awareness in the moment can really help us guide about what's happening inside, and understanding that safety, the concept of safety, is really an internal process. And this is an interesting thing for these times, is that we're looking outside, we're scrolling through social media and the news, well, I am anyway, and feeling really overwhelmed, and sort of looking for someone to throw me some certainty. And I'm looking for someone to throw me some congruent information instead of all of these different chunks here and there. And those things actually escalate the nervous system. So uncertainty and that incongruence, as well as things such as saying should, so putting expectations on yourself, these can really heighten the nervous system. So taking moments to understand and taking breaks can support that regulation. The internal and external resources, which we'll get to in a minute. And remembering that doing these practices, the aim of the game is not for us to all just sit here and be like, woo, I'm so calm. That's not the point. The checking in is actually just to be connected to self. So it's not that you need to do these practices and think you're going to get down on that thermometer to just being okay again, or that after it you're going to feel completely calm. But it's that you've given yourself a moment to connect, and through that connection have more access to information. And the information, I guess, that you're not going to get from the outside world, but that there's all this information internally that we can access that's basically telling us so many things. So that's what we will get to next around some practices. Whoa, sorry for waffling on, and also sorry for drawing all over your grid.
It's perfect.
Just going to stop sharing for a moment. Yeah. Are you there?
Still here.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So Maylai, I guess this is maybe a Q&A, and then would love to draw on your wisdom around. So we've talked about Rex and Albert. We've talked about what's happening in the nervous system, and I guess having some tools and some practical ways that we can build in that regulation and build in that moment-to-moment awareness would be really helpful.
Yeah, so this is where we wanted to take it from here, is sort of presenting some simple trauma theory and some analogies and ways of understanding what's happening in our brains, in our bodies, nervous systems, but recognizing that that's really helpful information, but it really kind of hits home in a way when you have the ability to experience it for yourself, and also to have some practical tools to make that connection, to notice, okay, what is happening in my own body? What is my own Rex and Einstein? What are they doing actually in my being? And that's a starting place for you to be able to self-regulate and for you then to also have more of a point of connection with people that you're working with. And as Anna said, that awareness and that connection kind of really is the first step and the first key. So we'll take it out of theoretical intellectual knowledge, as useful as that is. We don't want to throw it away, but put that into some practices. So I might just segue straight into the self-attunement grid, if that's okay, Anna.
Yes.
Yeah, if you're happy to put it up, and then I'll explain it a little bit more once it's up on the screen.
Yeah. There we go. Oh, my doodles have gone.
Oh. So this I call it the self-attunement grid. And as you know, self-attunement suggests, it's really a tool and that I find like simple, structured, helpful for noticing what's happening in your own internal experience at any moment in time. And this is a tool and a practice that you can use for yourself. You can do this with your team. You can use it with families as well. And what we'll do is move through this in a few different ways. So you can see that there's 3 rows, 6 columns. If you did have a piece of paper or a notebook handy, you're welcome to draw your own up, because what I'll invite you to do is to actually write down some things. A way of trying to link the theory and the analogies in with this self-attunement grid and these aspects of experience. So you can see there's 6 categories there. There's thoughts, feelings or emotions, physical sensations, breath, movement or posture, maybe other actions. And then there's also a category called other, because sometimes we experience things that we're like, I'm not quite sure where it fits or if it fits in any of those other categories. And in a way, we can look at this and think about it in relationship to those aspects of our brain or our nervous systems and what's happening. And this can then be a tool for you to track what's happening in your own inner experience and nervous system. So thoughts, obviously more related to our inner Einstein and what the quality of those thoughts are, if your cognitive capacities are online or offline. Feelings and emotions, and I saw someone popped in the chat box, is like, where does the monkey go? And this is the monkey here. It's the mammalian brain, the limbic brain, or the emotional brain, which is sort of tucked in right in the middle of your brain here. So if you think of Rex's downstairs, we're going to put a middle floor in and pop the monkey in there. Monkeys bring me so much joy. I'm not sure why, but I can't say monkey without smiling.
Actually, they make me so happy.
I know. I love monkeys. I was born in the year of the monkey. Maybe that's why. So the monkey would go in the middle there as your emotions and feelings, and then your Einstein is on top. And of course, they're not completely separate. And what we actually want to do is to establish those connections so that instead of going offline, there's a strong enough connection that it can stay online. I'm just looking here, someone's saying, when you share your screen, sorry, let me see if I can jump in there and just check that. Oh, when you share your screen, we can't see you or what you are showing. Some can see and some might not be able to see. Oh, lots of people are saying they can see. So Nikki, I'm not sure, maybe it's something to do with your settings. Maybe if you go on speaker view rather than gallery view at the top right corner of your Zoom window. Let's see if that might help. I'll let you work that out while I continue, if that's okay. Someone says take it off full screen. Yeah.
Take it off full screen?
Yeah, although I'm not sure. Yeah. So physical sensations, breath and movement. Oh yeah, Anna, if you can put it. Oh yeah, there we go. Someone says select view video panel from the top. I love this collective support. So these different aspects that we often associate with the body. Physical sensations, breath, Nikki, I'm glad that you can see it now, and movement typically are more, they're governed, so the autonomic functions are governed by Rex, governed by the lower brain. So we can tap into and notice what's happening on these levels to really have that sense of what's happening in our own brains and our nervous systems. And dividing them into these categories hopefully makes it easier to discern and to decipher what's happening in your inner world, because sometimes there can be so much going on that it's really hard to work out. We might turn inwards and go, whoa, that's way too overwhelming, or I can't make out all of the pieces and I'm just confused and I don't know. So we might choose one or a few. So what we'll work with here is starting with taking a baseline. There'll be 3 parts. Taking a baseline first, where I'll just invite you to take a couple of minutes to scan internally across these 6 categories of experience, and then maybe jot down what you observe. You may observe a lot, you may observe a little. Absolutely fine. It's not about what you experience, but noticing and becoming aware of what you do and don't experience. The second part of it, I'm going to read out a scenario that's intended to provide some activation, so some triggering. It's intended to give you a little bit of charge so that you can track what your body and nervous system does when there's charge and activation. And then the third part is that I'm not going to leave you in an activated state, hopefully, but guide through a short embodied resourcing practice, which hopefully will help to regulate and settle your nervous system. We say hopefully because different things will work for different people. So if you think about the window of tolerance that Anna was talking about and our ups and downs of the day, we're starting with a baseline of wherever you are in this moment. We're going to intentionally bring you up a little bit and then hopefully come back down a little and track what's happening internally along the way. So if you would like to join in with this, you're welcome to take a minute or so just to tune in with what's happening in your own internal experience. And you're welcome to jot down as you go, or to take a minute and listen and notice and then write down. That might be what you notice in the realm of your thoughts or cognitions. Any feelings or emotions that may be present. Any physical sensations. And I'm just naming them all, and you're welcome to travel through them of whatever takes your own attention in your body. And physical sensations are really body sensations, so different from emotions. And to distinguish, if I was feeling sad, that would be the feeling or emotion. The sensation of that might be a heaviness in my chest, or a sagging of my shoulders, for example, or weightiness. You might be noticing what's happening with your breath, qualities of your breath. You might be noticing your posture or any movements or actions that your body's making. You might be noticing some other experience that doesn't fit into one of these categories. I'll give you a few more moments just to track and see what you observe. So I'll invite you to pause there as we move into the next piece, and just again to say that you may have a lot written in one column and not much in another. That's also really interesting information to know. It's like, oh, this is what I can easily access already with my awareness. And there may be other areas, and it may depend on the state that you're in as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read out a scenario. I'm just going to pull it up on my screen. I'm going to read out a scenario and then invite you to do the same after I've read it out. So to notice what you notice, thoughts, feelings, emotions, physical sensations, breath, movement, posture, or anything else that's showing up in you. Again, this is intended to be a little bit activating. I'm really hoping that it's not overly activating for you. And as I said, we will do some body-based resourcing practices as well as support after this too. And this scenario is based in our current scenario that many of you may be facing. So here it is. You turn up to work on Monday and your manager calls the team together for an emergency meeting. Because of coronavirus, the government has just announced strong recommendations for people to stay at home, and there are serious restrictions on public gatherings. The majority of the families your organisation supports have suddenly cancelled their appointments. You know all too well under the NDIS, this means your organisation will have very little income coming in, definitely not enough to survive for any period of time. A panic discussion starts about whether there will be staff cuts, and if that means that your organisation, already struggling under reduced funding, will need to close its doors. Everyone starts wondering what will happen to the families and children. You know how vulnerable they are, and that for many families, your organisation is their only lifeline. You know that with stay-at-home measures, loss of employment, school closures, panic buying, and general fear, that there's going to be an increase in domestic violence and serious mental health challenges. And many of your families are already reliant on your services just to manage day to day. Talk turns to making arrangements to work from home and to take your work online. You'll need to set up technology to offer online appointments for families to continue to receive some support. Personally, you were already feeling at the point of burnout in your job before this all happened, and you really struggle with technology. The thought of so much change and having to use technology just to keep your job sends you into a total wave of internal panic and despair. But you don't want your colleagues to know that. So you're also just trying really hard to keep it together. So as you receive that scenario and take it in, and take this moment to notice and observe what's happening now in the realm of your thoughts and cognitions, feelings or emotions, physical sensations, breath, movement or posture, any other inner experience. I'll offer you about a minute here for you to tune in and to write down what you observe. Note that this has already happened. Tuning in to how your own system is responding to these events. And your personal scenario may be so close to this, or it may be a little different. How does your body respond even to hearing this? Some notes coming in saying, yep, that triggered me. And I apologize, but it's also part of the learning for you to see, what did you really notice in your internal experience? And that you might also, through this, be starting to make some linkages between these aspects of experience and our bodies and what's happening in our circumstances as well. So we'll move on to a resourcing practice. So here's a practice that's designed to bring you back into the present moment, out of the story and the scenario and the potential panic, and back into your body as a support, as a stabilizer. So this is a practice that is using self-touch, or sometimes self-contact. And if you'd like to join in with this, you might start by bringing one hand to a shoulder, across your body, and then taking a moment here to use some pressure, maybe squeezing your shoulder, your upper arm. And as you're doing that, you could even also take a look at your hand squeezing your arm. Maybe feel the sensation of pressure. And you're really welcome to use as much or as little pressure as you like. This is your body, and you're always in control of how you want to use or engage with your body. At any time, you could come to the other side, maybe starting at the shoulder, with the upper arm, squeezing. If it feels useful, you could use your eyes and look at what you're doing. So we're engaging more of our senses. And you could also cross both arms. Take your hands to opposite arms or shoulders. Sometimes we call this a butterfly hug. And so you might continue with the squeezing and the moving here, or you might bring it towards stillness and actually find a little bit more of a self-hug here. You can even use a little bit of pressure of your arms across your chest. If you are crossing your arms across your chest, it might also help you to notice that you're breathing, bringing awareness to that part of your body. And there's nothing that you need to do or change here. If it feels useful, be noticing that your body's breathing. And sometimes by bringing awareness to our breath, our bodies respond by naturally taking a slower or deeper breath. And if it feels useful, you could add in a sigh here as well. And as you're ready, moving from this short practice, self-resourcing, self-touch practice, back to your self-attunement grid. And again, taking about a minute or so to write down and jot down what you notice now across those different realms of inner experience. Just for the last few moments of this practice, you're welcome to reflect on what you noticed. I saw one little comment pop up in the chat box. Yeah, so simple, kids could do it. Exactly. Kids love this butterfly hug too, and it's really exploring touch and pressure as a way of remembering. It's like, oh yeah, here I am in my body, grounding and settling. Any other resource recommendations? Yeah, maybe what we can do, because I saw there were some other questions for resources in the trauma theory, is we can put some resources together and share. What I would say too is these practices and resources, these body-based practices, as you can see, they're actually really simple and effective often, that it doesn't have to take very long for a state shift. And I know many of you have said, okay, this feels, I can take a sigh.
I love so much. It's made my day about the 18-month-old in the lap. I have my 18-month-old in my lap and he sighed after me. That's like co-regulation in just amazing. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. Yeah, so I found squeezing my own arms really helped me bring me back to body and out of my head.
Yeah. And I think I wish we could be here all night. I mean, I personally do. Probably other people have a life, but I think we'll put together some resources, and Mela and I are actually developing a course with this a lot in more detail, which will be an embodied course. So if you were interested in that, perhaps you could privately message us here with your email so we can keep you in the loop about that. And I know Hannah has been magically working behind the scenes. I don't know if people during the process have been sharing any resources. Hannah, have you received any suggestions for your grid? Okay, I'll check. All right, we will compile sort of what's been shared along with some other suggestions. Because Mela and I are dorky, yesterday we were playing I Spy. I was pretending to be the child, and it was actually really fun because what happened is as Mela was sort of asking me as the child to go around my space with my screen, we played I Spy. So Mela then spied an object, and then I was guessing that, and then I was sort of introducing questions around the touch of the object, how it felt in my hand, and that's bringing in that external orienting and those questions that are sort of expanding that awareness of space, which I loved. And one of my favourite things that I've been doing non-stop is playing Humbug, which is humming songs to someone and they have to guess what song it is, which is bringing that tone to the face, and just gentle things around tapping or eucalyptus leaves in a steam bath and feeling that, and then sort of talking my way through how I'm feeling and what I'm sensing. But there are so many different types of practices. So we have 4 minutes left. I wanted to share a resource that was, let me just share my screen. So I was working on a project with the University of Melbourne and Calparan, an early intervention provider, around mothers' mental health. And at the time we came up with a framework, and we've adapted it quite a lot, but I always like to acknowledge where sort of acronyms and things come from. So myself and the project team came up with this for that project. And now it's sort of evolved into this. We wanted to offer a framework for you with some acronyms just around embedding what we've been talking about for the last 90 minutes and how this might play out in a way that you might engage with yourself, with your teams and with the families you work with. So SOLAR is the acronym, and as I said, it's a framework for checking in really. So it starts with S, which is space, and what we just went through then with the self-attunement is a beautiful place to even start, even before starting a session with a family, about noticing what's happening in your body and where things are at. That then gives you a good understanding about your that window of tolerance, and you can use some practices there if you're wanting to regulate that space. So first, checking in with yourself. So am I okay to be holding this conversation? That then leads to open sentences or open questions. And it sounds really common sense, but the thing about questions is often when they're phrased as closed, a power dynamic comes into the conversation where the person's more thinking about what's the right answer rather than how do I actually feel. So an example of an open sentence might be, as we move through these times of this global pandemic, what I feel is, and then leaving a space for the person to respond or for you to respond, or as I move through these times, what I need is, or what I appreciate is, and these can also be open questions as well. So asking teams, Tell me what's been happening in your body for the last few days, or how have you felt the last few days, rather than are you okay? And then that sometimes leads to just yes or fine, or how are you? Fine. The importance about this, and I guess why this is a sequence, is the listening deeply. So that's attending to what is there and welcoming it. So that might be attending to the narrative that you're hearing, or the words that you're hearing, but it might just be actually attending to what's actually happening inside you as well. So just noticing, inquiring about that practicing curiosity. Acknowledging. So acknowledging and welcoming all aspects of the experience. And you can acknowledge this by just saying, I hear what you're saying, or you can normalize that in saying that's a typical response to what's currently happening. You know, it's normal to feel terrified. It's normal to feel like you just want to crawl up in bed. And you can also use trauma theory, like we've been talking about today, to acknowledge it as well. So did you know this might be happening in your body? And then the R we use for resource, which we've heard a little bit about self-resourcing. And this is also about referrals as well, if you're working with people, in that working within your scope, and that sometimes this is the moment to say, maybe this person can help you, or maybe this resource can help you. I think back to the polyvagal ladder, is that when we move through these states, we also create stories that that we attach to those states. And so when we say move into more of a freeze response, the story we might tell ourselves might be something like, my work doesn't care about me, they don't value me. And we can have this sort of story attached to it. Being able to sort of vocalize that and have that acknowledged allows it to, and there's a saying that's in the trauma world around, if you can name it, you can tame it. And being able to have these trusting relationships in workplaces or within yourself to sort of talk about this can help move through these states. So that's solar in a nutshell. And sorry, we have to wrap up so quickly. It's just got away from us. I'm just going to stop sharing that for a moment. Did you have anything to add on that, Maylai, before I say bye?
No, I just love that tool so much.
Yeah, it's helpful. It's helpful for me, particularly when I can feel Rex is maybe taking a little bit of control as well. I can go back to a framework and regulate myself. And also when I work with families, particularly families that are in chaotic situations and are experiencing quite a lot, I can take that on if I haven't checked myself before the call, or if I haven't checked myself before the car. I can really absorb that. So solar I work through every time I go into a family's home, and every time I come out, to really just go through that process. So thank you. I mean, it's 4:32, we have to wrap up. I just wanted to thank the 248 participants that are on the webinar, and everyone that's on the Facebook Live. This is truly phenomenal, and thank you so much for the beautiful comments in the chat. It's really been helpful because it was quite a nerve-wracking experience for me anyway. I wanted to leave you, I guess, with just one final thought, in that one of the best ways that we can help each other is to be ourselves. And I know it sounds really cliche, and authenticity is a term used to sell everything. But in terms of safety, finding practices and finding ways of being with each other that feel right for you, and that fit and that you can work with, is a beautiful starting place. Rather than building on skills and resources that you may have heard might work but don't truly feel right to you. So you already would have that knowledge, and building on that is sort of the beautiful starting place. And to wrap up, I guess my favourite quote in the world is, be curious, not furious. And I invite you to take that quote into your day around yourself and the teams and the families you work with. So maybe we can just have a final breath together before we wrap up. So I'm going to take a deep breath in And a breath out. Thank you, everyone. It's really made my week actually showing up here as a collective and being in these times together. So just thank you for your time.